When did you watch your sibling's ego get completely destroyed in real time? My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer as I walked into Sunday dinner. Congratulations, the Samsung contract is finalized. $2.8 million. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and sat down across from my brother Saul, who was already holding court about his latest app development milestone. Speaking of business, how's the consulting thing going? Saul asked, cutting his steak with surgical precision. His tone carried the same energy as asking about a child's lemonade stand. What followed was the same humiliating ritual that had become our family tradition. Mom immediately jumped in to praise Saul's 3 new clients this week, beaming at him like he had cured cancer. When I mentioned my business was building momentum, Saul leaned back with that familiar smirk and pointed out I'd been saying that for 2 years. Dad nodded thoughtfully and suggested I consider returning to corporate work for steady income. There was no shame in admitting when something wasn't working, he explained with gentle patience. My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice level, insisting I was committed to making this work. Committed? Saul laughed. You've burned through your savings. You're living in that studio apartment, and you're still talking about making it work. This isn't commitment. This is denial. The attacks came in waves after that. My grandmother patted my hand sympathetically and suggested Saul could give me a job at his company, starting at the bottom to learn properly. The condescension hit like a physical blow. I felt my face flush, but forced myself to take a slow breath. Saul's voice rose as he pointed out my 12-year-old Honda and my lack of real vacations in 3 years. He turned to our parents to suggest someone needed to have an honest conversation with me about cutting losses. Mom's expression softened into pity as she explained they just wanted what was best for me. Saul's company was doing so well, and I was still experimenting. Saul seized on the word and leaned forward. That's exactly what this is. Playing entrepreneur while the rest of us are building real businesses with real revenue. He launched into his theory about what separates successful people from dreamers, explaining that successful people know when to quit the fantasy. I stared at my untouched plate, feeling the familiar burn of shame mixed with rage. Every family gathering had become the same performance where Saul got to be the business genius while I got treated like a cautionary tale. When I quietly said I wasn't giving up, Saul shot back that persistence wasn't always a virtue. Sometimes it was just stubbornness. I was 32 years old and couldn't keep pretending I would stumble into some big break. Dad cleared his throat and reminded me they'd supported my dream, but Saul had a point about being realistic. The word realistic hung in the air like a verdict. I looked around the table at faces mixed with pity and frustration, all convinced they were witnessing my slow-motion failure. Saul delivered his final blow about my wasted potential. I was smart and hardworking, but I was throwing it away on fantasy instead of building something real. He'd offered to help me network and introduce me to people who could give me actual opportunities, but I was too proud to accept help. I don't need help, I said quietly. Saul explained that everyone needs help, that business was about connections and partnerships. I couldn't just will my way to success with good intentions. That's when I decided they'd heard enough. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. The screen showed my lawyer's text message with the Samsung contract details still visible. You're right about connections, I said calmly. That's how I landed the exclusive software licensing deal with Samsung for the AI interface I've been developing. The table went silent. Saul's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. $2.8 million. The contract was finalized this afternoon. Saul's face drained of color as he stared at the phone screen. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's wine glass froze in midair. I stood up slowly and explained that the studio apartment was my development space, and the old Honda meant I didn't need to impress anyone with car payments when I was reinvesting everything into R&D. Saul's confident posture crumbled as he stammered that I'd never said anything about Samsung. He never asked about my actual work. He just assumed I was failing. The silence stretched until Mom whispered about the $2.8 million. I nodded and mentioned the royalties plus 3 other companies bidding for licensing rights. I looked directly at Saul. I guess we have different definitions of realistic. Saul's face flushed red. He opened his mouth twice, but no words came out. The brother who had spent 2 years treating me like a charity case was now staring at someone who had just signed a deal worth more than his entire company's annual revenue. I picked up my jacket. I should go. I have calls to make about the expansion. As I walked toward the door, Dad quietly asked why I hadn't told them. I paused at the threshold because I wanted to prove it to myself first, not to you. The last thing I saw before leaving was Saul still staring at the empty chair where I had been sitting, finally understanding that his little brother had been building an empire while he was giving lectures about failure.